Hi, I'm Dr. Ashley, and I have a very special guest with me, Jeni Howe.
Hi.
And I apologize if we start laughing halfway through because we tried to start this and there have been many takes of just laughter.
Right. It might just be a whole video of laughing and then just talking about laughing and trying not to laugh.
It's possible. But the whole concept of today's interview was supposed to be about support for moms during pregnancy. I'm sorry, you guys.
So, Ashley, how do you support moms during pregnancy?
Oh, this is about you.
Okay.
Jeni is a doula.
Hi. I am a doula. Okay, so do you want to know how doulas support moms?
I want to know, first of all, like, what led you to become a doula?
Oh, good question. Well, when I was 20, I went to my first birth, and
wow.
Yeah, and it was not ideal. I mean, especially in hindsight, there were so many things that now I would wish to go very differently for a mom in labor, a person in labor, but it still hooked me. I still couldn't believe that this was real and people did this every day and have been doing it forever.
Were you at this birth as a doula?
No, family member.
Oh.
Support. Anyways, then fast forward 9 or 10 years and I had my own child, my firstborn, Michaela, and hired a doula for that birth. My doula is the reason I didn't have a cesarean. My doula is the reason that I wasn't deeply traumatized by a pretty crazy first birth. I just felt empowered and loved and all of those good things and clinically informed. And so after the birth, I basically, sorry, we might say hi to people coming in from music class.
That's true. We're just kind of in the sharing room of Baby Botanica right now, which is a common space.
Yeah.
But it has really good lighting, so.
So bear with us. And then after that, I had been to actually 2 other births in the interim, just as like friends had babies and stuff, and each time I was equally mesmerized. Anyways, by the time after I had my baby, I was trained as a postpartum doula after that, because I know I couldn't do births with a newborn or even a baby, and I was breastfeeding. Hi. And then over the next, we had 3 babies in 5 years, and basically over the next 5 or 6 years, I just sort of casually did postpartum work. I was the person who helped with breastfeeding and meal prep and siblings, and also attended several more births. Just kind of was a person that people knew liked to help out if there was a partner who felt squeamish or this or that. Anyways, this is a very long answer.
No, it's perfect.
Okay.
But scoot in so they can see you, right?
Okay.
Don't. Yeah, we're here.
It's nice to be close to Ashley. Highly recommend. And then basically by the time I suspected I wanted to sort of commit to this as a job, and knew also that I couldn't do that until my youngest was about 3 and was going to preschool regularly. He's now 7.5. So yeah, about 5 years ago, I went back. I did my postpartum doula training again. I did my birth doula training and got certified by DONA in both. And since then, since that point of being properly trained and sort of doing this much more, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, like not
consistent?
Sort of informal, more formally becoming a doula and having a website, and I've attended 50 plus births. So there were the sort of like dozen that came before I did this as a real job, and then about 50 since moving up to New York and doing this full time.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I sort of stopped doing postpartum work as much because I'm not consistent enough scheduling wise, because if I'm on call for births, it's harder to be planning postpartums.
What led you to hire a doula originally?
Good question. No one's ever asked me that. One of the births I was at in my 20s before my own, the baby ingested meconium, and it was a big to-do in the room, and everyone came in.
For those who don't know what...
Sorry, it's poop. It's baby poop. It's when babies poop in utero, and then there's their own, very usually, non-problematic feces in the amniotic fluid, but sometimes if it's thick, or they can ingest it and it clogs their pipes, essentially. Technically speaking,
it's baby poop.
It's baby poop, and it's green usually. So, or sometimes dark brown. Anyway, this birth, this beautiful baby, ingested meconium. I actually still don't know how serious it was, but it was certainly treated like a full-blown medical emergency. And so, I think I was actually very newly pregnant when that happened, and I was like, okay, well, thank God we're in a hospital. What would have happened if we weren't in a hospital? And so, while I knew that I wanted an unmedicated childbirth, I also was scared to be outside of a hospital. And so I hired a doula because I also understood that by being in a hospital, I would more likely ask for an epidural, and I really wanted not to, and more likely have. Okay, trying to pick up where we ended.
Right.
So
I don't have storage on my phone, so we're back. It's fine.
Technical issues. You're good. Anyway, so I was delivering at a hospital, but also didn't want anyone to touch me during the birth, and so I hired a doula because someone had suggested that might be a great way to have the birth I wanted. And
who suggested it? Do you remember?
My friend Crystal. She was a neighbor who had delivered at a birth center, and so I hired Jackie Kelleher, who's amazing, and she basically said, I can't save you, like I can inform you and I can be there and I can support you, but ultimately you are delivering at a place that has super high rates of all these different things. And I think I knew that it wasn't a great fit, and that I made the decision very early on in my pregnancy when it was almost impossible to imagine that my body knew how to do this thing. It was so new. And then as I grew more confident and I grew more well-informed and read IMA Gaskin, I did.
Love that.
Yes, so good. And Penny Simpkins, birth partner. On some level, I knew that I wasn't delivering in the right place, but was sort of like, well, I'll hire a doula and hope for the best. And then when Jackie said to me, would you consider switching practitioners, providers, settings, that felt really overwhelming at first. And then as soon as I just took the first step to finding a place that was more compatible with what I wanted, it felt immediately right. So I switched to a birth center at 30 weeks. I switched to the Bryn Mawr Birth Center outside Philly, kept the doula, and it just immediately felt better. And when I work with clients, I always say this, that unless they feel like they are at least 90% compatible philosophily, clinically with their care team, it's always worth trying to switch. That you're a paying customer, and you aren't, unless you're very high risk or you're not stuck in one practice, that it has to be a good fit for both sides, that you're also not doing anyone any favors if you're like, I know you have a 98% epidural rate and a 45% C-section rate and a 40% induction or augmentation rate, but I want a natural childbirth. Like, that's also not a fair thing to ask of a practice who doesn't really do that. So it has to fit on both sides.
That's good. I didn't think about it that way.
It's like asking a midwife to perform like various things that aren't in their wheelhouse.
Right.
So for me, my doula was really helpful because she suggested a midwifery model that was just so much better for me, and frankly, given my first birth, it was also an amazing decision because I really did not want a cesarean section, and I would have ended up in a C-section probably 10 to 15 hours before I delivered my baby vaginally. So time was of essence. And then I think just on a deeper level why I became a doula, or what speaks to me about birth, which clients often ask me, is I would say that, just for one thing, it's just in my heart. There's not a real why. It's just from the minute I saw a baby born and a mother in labor, I felt like it was truly the biggest honor I had ever had to watch that process and watch the process of a woman becoming a mother of a human.
I think it's so cool that at 20 years old you got to be a part of a birth.
I do too. I feel really, really lucky. So, you're watching a baby go from the inside to the outside, a woman go from being a woman to being a mother and a woman, and I do like big turning points in people's lives. I mean, I was an occupational therapist, and I worked with people in sort of very intense periods, and I do love that. And then I guess the other part of it is, as a feminist, I feel really clearly that we don't get it right a lot of the times in our country, and that it's sort of somehow became a little bit tied up in a bit of a more patriarchal medical system. And I think if I can be a part of sort of returning it to being more about women and more client-centered, it's a privilege to do so, really.
That's amazing. I had 2 vaginal childbirths, and I didn't have a doula, but now knowing you and a little bit more about how supportive doulas are, I really wish that I could have that experience. So for some of like the listeners out here, right?
So we're having another baby.
So I would love to be pregnant just to have Jeni as my doula. However, I can't foresee another child right now.
We'll talk more.
I mean, our house is busy. There's only 2, but I feel like there's 6.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
there's like
right.
extra ones running around for some reason.
Right.
Their energy is very high.
They're really cute.
But so for me, I didn't hire one because I didn't know why. I had no clue as to like how does a doula fit into this whole prenatal and during the birth and postpartum scene, and then what kind of benefits, like what would lead someone to hire a doula?
Good question.
Or what maybe information about the doula and client relationship would help somebody who's kind of questioning whether or not a doula fits into like their model? What would help them see a little bit more clarity as like, wow, that's something that I could really use for
That's
support?
a really good question.
Versus like, maybe that's not for me.
Yeah, that is a great question. And there, I think, are a few answers. So, for one, having continuous support during labor is statistically proven to improve your clinical outcomes. So, meaning, and when we talk about continuous support, it actually doesn't need to be a doula, but that in our society, in our country, usually is who it is. And this is different than a partner. This is different than your spouse, your partner, your significant other, who, frankly, in my experience without doulas, is being asked to perform just so many tasks. And especially if you're first-time parents, you know, it's a big ask to say to someone who's never been to a birth, now you are my emotional support, my physical support, my childbirth educator in the thick of things, the liaison between our family and the clinical care providers. It's so much to ask, and so people pull it off beautifully all the time. I mean, your significant other is certainly the biggest support in a birth, but what I see when I work with couples is that by having a doula there, it enables the significant other, the partner, to be the loving partner, to be who they always are at home or in the world, or who they always want to be, to support the laboring person. So meaning, you know, if I come home and I've had a terrible day, I sit down with my husband and I vent or I emote and this and that, and he knows how to make me feel better and soothe me and sort of send me out into the world the next day feeling like everything's going to be okay. But if I were to ask him to do that and deal with whatever sort of interpersonal thing was affecting me, and also write a letter about it or a plan about how it's not going to happen again, and it's just so much. And so and what I want is for partners just to be able to provide that support they usually do. So by hiring a doula, I think a lot of people who hire doulas, they're just aware that their partner might feel in over their heads at a birth, either physically or emotionally, or in terms of advocacy or media, whatever.
So you can basically help take away some of the overwhelm that the partner is
100%.
like feeling. and then their stress level is lower, which then
Way lower.
transfers over to the birthing
Yes.
person,
Yeah.
and their stress level is lower,
Yeah,
which
I mean,
we know stress will like
cortisol is a real
down
thing.
your labor
Absolutely.
and your birth process.
That's
So,
a good job. I
thank
mean,
you.
adrenaline is no friend of oxytocin, and when you have these two hormones sort of
Yeah.
going toe to toe, it's a problem.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so then basically the other part of it is that I think the partner feels like they could fulfill their role better, and they're more relaxed, and then everyone's more relaxed. The other people who really look for a doula are people who feel strongly about the clinical outcomes. I mean, having continuous support, having a doula just lowers every single probability of an intervention if someone doesn't want an intervention. So
and is that because you're the liaison between?
I think it's, for me personally, it's because I educate, like really crazily educate my clients for many, many months. I am a huge advocate of them seeking out the right care professional for them. So if they're in an obstetric practice, I open the door and create opportunity and suggestions about maybe it's worth looking for someone else.
Is the education prenatally as a doula like kind of the norm, or is that a question that they should be asking a potential
It is a
doula?
great question. I happen to be a Lamaze certified childbirth educator, as well as several other forms of childbirth education. So part of my personal package, I mean, every doula is going to provide some education, as they should. They are well educated in birth, but my clients often get 8 or 9 hours of
It's
birth
not that
education.
you just like show up at the birth and it's
No.
like, here I am.
No, I
like
know
there's
my
been a
clients
relationship.
well. Yes, and when I say I want endless phone calls, endless texts, endless this, my clients, anyone who's listening who's had me as their doula will say that's true. Like we meet a few times, but more than that, there's just so much interaction. And then for people for whom I do their whole childbirth education, we've logged, by the time they are in labor, we've logged 10 hours together, pretty intimately. So in terms, and then I definitely, especially the longer I go in this career, the more I feel comfortable highly recommending people switch practices if it is clearly not a good fit.
Yeah.
And that's not because of an agenda I have. That's because I think information is power, and making informed decisions is the name of the game. So, I think it also brings down clinical outcomes, because a lot of times people are really scared into making decisions with interventions that they're terrified of something happening. And if I can be there and say, yes, there was a heart deceleration after 2 contractions, but that does not a cesarean cause. Like we can, let's see if we can have someone look at this for a few more contractions and then make a decision. And what if there's a different position we could be in to facilitate, a better, an increased heart rate after contractions, stuff like that. So, I feel really proud of my numbers. My cesarean rate is, oh boy, I mean, I've had 9 cesareans in 3 years. For planned vaginal births, my cesarean rate is hovering around 10%, which is, 25% lower than the average up here.
Wow.
My epidural rate is incredibly low. Pitocin augmentation, and I'll be clear that when people say, I just want someone who's going to be able to like tell the nurses what I want and tell the doctor if this isn't right, I say that is totally fine. I'm not your doula. I will never go toe to toe with a doctor or a nurse. I will never, because now my client doesn't have a team anymore. They have like sides, and it's not fair to them. And so of course, there are times where I will communicate with a doctor or a nurse and say, I think my client's hoping for such and such, but I do not like speaking on women's behalf. That said, when one is in active labor or transition, the partner or I often do end up sort of trying to share their hopes or concerns, because it's just a lot of energy for them to get out like 5 sentences of here's why I'm scared, right? But as soon as I become the mouthpiece for a woman, then I'm part of a system I don't like, which is sort of assuming we know what women want, or sort of disempowering them. So, and so, clinically hiring a doula is just the outcomes are, from every statistic, they are improved. That's not just me. That is doulas in general. Then I would say the third group is, women of color are dying in childbirth in our country, and so there's a lot of activism right now about how to support women of color and other groups whose outcomes are disastrous in a lot of times, and how to support groups who frankly need a lot more advocacy in birth, and we need to understand what's happening here and why these numbers are just terrifying.
Wow. I was going to say the why behind that is probably unclear.
Whys are, it's complicated, and there are a lot of people studying this, but until we have solutions and answers, I think that doulas are a huge asset in trying to promote better outcomes for different minority groups, particularly women of color who are really struggling through no fault of their own.
It's interesting. So through all